Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Fan Project Content Creators Series brought to you by Sports Innovation Lab. Once again, I'm your host, Jack Barlow. Now, as content supervisor here at Sports Innovation Lab, I'm excited to spend the next few weeks chatting with the recipients of our Fan Project Title IX grant. Now, the grant is focused on promoting up-and-coming content creators that are producing innovative storytelling content around women's sports. At Sports Innovation Lab, we've been focusing on how data can unlock the business potential of women's sports, and we've also launched the Fan Project to prove to the industry about the untapped market of women's sports and how the industry has left billions of dollars on the table. Now, today, our second edition of the Fan Project Title IX Content Creators Series features Jessica Luther and Dr. Amira Rose Davis of the Burn It All Down podcast. Now, alongside their co-hosts Shireen Ahmed, Brenda Esley, and Lindsay Gibbs, Jessica and Amira are using their platform to give fans of women's sports more of what they deserve: coverage of women's sports. Now, they know there's a massive discrepancy in the amount of coverage between men's and women's sports, and they're working to change that each and every day. Now, they want to provide their listeners with an environment that focuses on more than just the stats and offers insight into the bigger issues surrounding the athletes and the sports they play. Now, you'll hear how Burn It All Down is working to change the narrative around women's sports and offer a sense of community that the platform's been creating throughout the industry. So I'm excited to welcome Jessica Luther and Dr. Amira Rose Davis of the Burn It All Down podcast to the Fan Project Content Creators Series. All right, everyone. As you just heard, I'm joined by Jessica Luther and Dr. Amira Rose Davis of the Burn It All Down podcast. We're here to talk women's sports. We're here to talk content creation. Jessica, Amira, thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Awesome. Well, as you all know, as I just spoke, Burn It All Down is a great podcast focusing on women's sports. And we have these wonderful women here today to discuss how they're changing the content world. They were recipients of our Sports Innovation Lab Fan Project grant. It's focusing on promoting women's sports content and the creators behind it. So I'll toss you both an easy one here to start. Amira, why don't we kick it off with you? What got you into the content creation world, and what was the reason for focusing on women's sports?
Yeah, I'm going to kick this back to Jessica because I fell into it. But Jessica will detail more about how Burn It All Down specifically came to occupy this space.
Awesome.
Fell into like a fish into water. Yeah, there was it's 5 women that work in sports, and we were all friends in a private way and decided that we should move our discussions that we were having all the time about sports and the sports world and women's sports into a public arena. And someone suggested doing a podcast, and I think we thought that would be easy, which was a thing we learned very quickly. It is not, and it takes a lot of work to do. One of the women left pretty early into us doing the podcast, and Amira had already been a guest a couple times at that point, and we were all crossing our fingers that she would come be a permanent host with us. And so that's how you got the 5 of us as we are. But I do think we realized there was just a huge hole, especially in podcasting and in sports podcasting. Even now, there's only so many women who occupy the space. And so we were like a wrecking ball through the wall on that one. We're 5 of us, and we're here, and we're going to talk about sports, and we're going to talk about women's sports, and we're going to be, pretty in your face about it.
Yeah. And when Jess says the 5 of us, I just want to shout out our co-host, Dr. Brenda Esley, who's a Latin American historian at Hofstra University, Lindsay Gibbs, who is the amazing creator and author at Power Plays, a newsletter all about women's sports, and Shireen Ahmed, who is up in Canada. She's our resident Canadian, specializes in Muslim women's sports, anything Canadian, and hockey and global football. And then me and Jessica, of course, who we are, here with you today.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I appreciate you both being here and speaking from experience in the podcasting world as I produce our CEO, Angela Ruggiero's Fluid Fan podcast. Jessica, you've been a guest on the show. Yes. So I know the rigors of the podcasting world. So appreciate you guys taking a stab at that. And it's been able to be a great platform for you both and the rest of your co-hosts as well. And you talk about how you have a global presence given the Canadian focus as well as the focus on global football. A big thing that came out of our fan project report was the idea of creating a community and the community-based monetization model, which focuses on really changing the way that sports properties are looking at their fans. It's no longer, just a direct to consumer look. You have to really produce, distribute, and measure content differently. So, Amira, I'm going to go back to you here for this one. How has Burn It All Down kind of built their community from the ground up? Obviously, you were a guest on the show, and you decided to join on in the co-host space. So, how's it changed from when you got on, and how are you guys continuing to build that community?
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of blood, sweat, and tears. But it's been a really amazing journey. So when Burn It All Down was in its infancy, like many projects, turned to like GoFundMe's, like what's it called, Kickstarters, things like that, to have that seed money to just do what we understood to be the podcast basics. Pretty early on in that first year, we decided to go and make a move to Patreon. Now, at the time, this was like the most daunting thing. Jessica made us do a video where we talked about how sports media was only 4%, right? Covered women's sports only 4% of the time, right? Like the numbers were so low. And we made this pitch where we said, hey, if this bothers you like it bothers us, and if you care about women's sports, but if you also care about all sports from a feminist angle, if you care about hearing more diverse sports voices in sports, then start contributing to our Patreon for as low as $2 a month. And that's really where we started. And when we say that our flamethrower community has sustained us for these 4 years, it absolutely has. For 3 of those 4 years, those first 3 years, everything that we got came through our Patreon subscription model, which we're talking $2 a month subscriptions, maybe 5. We had a few people who would do more. And what we did was give extra content on that end. We created talks so we could continue to interface with that community. And that's one of the things that helped grow. Like they started saying we're flamethrowers, and we were like, oh, that's a thing. Now we have flamethrowers. And it continued to expand from there. We had, over the course of those years, a number of approaches and offers to join on to different media companies and opportunities. And all of them, in one way or another, would have sacrificed the core part of the show, whether it was content control or advertisements, or just like changing our actual dynamic. And so for a long time, we were really invested in keeping it independently run and curated community. And then last year we joined up with Blue Wire Sports Podcast Network because we were able to retain our control of our show. And what that has allowed us to do is to grow the community with more resources. Like we had been raising money to get a producer, to change our sound, to get nice equipment, et cetera. And our sound has gotten better, right, over the years. It's important for us to be accessible. So our transcription service is important. We were able to hire a full-time, or we were able to hire somebody who's dedicated to our socials and dedicated to curating that content, as well as somebody who now is our producer every week. So we weren't producing our own show, which what we did for way too long. And Blue Wire has been really integral in helping us continue to do that, because they have allowed us to monetize in new ways while keeping the core of who we are and keeping our Patreon community going. So now our Patreon still supports all of the work we do, still funds, those who work for us. And what we do still with them are fireside chats, where, we've had amazing chats with people in Germany, right? With flamethrowers from around the world that are connecting on a Friday night, or I guess it was Saturday morning.
Yeah, it was like very early wherever he was.
2 a.m. But when you talk about that global reach, right? When Jess pulls downloads and it's like, oh, we're literally in X number of countries, it's really meaningful for us. And to have that space where our flamethrowers can come together, whether it is for a fireside chat or a watch party where we're all getting together to just like sit there and yell about a sports thing together. And so I think that is where we are right now, which is we have had this new platform, but we're still us, and it has allowed us to be sharper and to work more efficiently. And it's very exciting.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I love the flamethrower moniker there for all the fans and the listeners. It's great. And I've been listening to a few of the shows, and you start everything off with "Welcome back, flamethrowers" or "Hey,
Hmm.
flamethrowers." So it's always good to foster that sense of community. And obviously, you've been building that, and the taking on Blue Wire as a partner and getting on that network must have been huge. And Jessica, if I could go to you, I began to hear a little bit of it through Amira's answer there, but we know fans of women's sports are digitally native. They're the most fluid fans, we like to say, at Sports Innovation Lab, and it is basically, you know, they're different than the quote unquote traditional fans. So if you could go and talk about the flamethrowers and your thoughts on fans of women's sports, how are they? I mean, I heard the word passionate. They
Yeah.
go on digital channels, you have watch parties. So they're doing these
Hmm.
behaviors that are different than, the traditional, I'm gonna sit on the couch, click on, my linear cable network and watch whatever sporting event is on. So um, how do you feel fans of women's sports and maybe your flamethrower community is different than the quote unquote traditional fan?
Well, they're very loyal, as Amira
I'm
was
like
pointing
literally
out.
crying just
I
remembering when we told them we were going to Blue Wire.
Yeah, like they're incredibly loyal and very supportive. And I think for us, one of the things is that they are critical sports fans, a lot of them, right? Like a lot of the people who listen are part of some kind of marginalized community, and they often come to sports in marginalized ways. And so being able to not only hear, as Amira talked about, the diversity of voices that we talk, the five of us, but also we do a weekly interview where we try to bring in all kinds of voices from sports. But we also talk about a wide range of topics that are not just your sort of the stuff you're going to hear on sports radio, right? Like we're bringing a feminist lens. We try to be as global as we can be. We try to be critical. And I think the fans that we have, and I think this is true of a lot of women's sports fans in general, are people who want that kind of content that allows them to question a lot of the sports that they're taking in, but also love them at the same time. And we see that all that we hear from the flamethrowers all the time. They have ideas for the show. They have ideas for people for us to interview, or they just have like emotional or intellectual reactions, and they like want to let us know like what they're thinking about.
Lots of stuff to burn.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
much stuff to burn, like too much stuff. We have our metaphorical burn pile every week where each one of us picks something to flame that we
Yeah.
don't like in the sports world, and that's endless, really. And so, yeah, I think that's the thing I always adore about women sports fans in general. There is this passion to them. They are defensive of the thing that they love in ways that make them incredibly loyal to it, but also they are willing to question it and look critically at it. And those are all things that the five of us care a lot about.
Mhm. And Amira, do you have anything to add? I know you were
Yeah,
saying you're getting a little teary
I
eyed.
did. I
It's
got emotional because it was a really big deal for us when we
It was
um
scary. That
it
was a
was
big,
scary. It was scary.
yeah.
And it was important for us to talk to like a core group of flamethrowers who had been day one supporters. So we had a fireside chat, and in the chat we announced it, and they were emotional. And one of the things that came through is like they were so thrilled, and they were also
Yeah.
so
You're making
protective.
me cry.
I know, well, they were so protective of us and what we have built. And it was so important for us because we really felt like it was taking the community on this journey, and we've continued to do that. And to Jessica's point, I think the other thing that has helped us with when we think about content, we think about our own development, is that those exchanges have also made us grow. We used to have a section of the show called Badass Woman of the Week, but our community of flamethrowers is much more gender expansive than that. And what we're highlighting and looking for in sports is actually a disruption of those gender binaries. And so we've changed that to torchbearers, who's lighting the torch to the sporting future we want to see. And that was because we were able to engage with a wide flamethrower community that talked about what it was like to have conversations that actually didn't take for granted a gender dichotomy in sports, who didn't take for granted, right? There's a way that we talk about fans of women's sports, but oftentimes it's just alluded to. It is a really expensive umbrella for a lot of people who otherwise have been pushed out of sporting spaces, for whether based on race or sexual orientation, or because they're women, or check all of the above. Yep. And so I think the core part of us is about keeping that intact, where it's like, what does it mean to imagine, and this is the whole concept of our show, imagine sports without what we've been conditioned to accept them as, with racism and homophobia and Islamophobia and all of the other things, and to like actually dare to dream of what a more robust sporting community could look like. And that's why it's really emotional, because when I look back at 4 years, it's like we've done that and sustained that for 4 years is really a lot of work. But sometimes you don't feel the work because you have so many hands at your back.
Yeah, no, I mean, that leads me perfectly into my next question, which I'll throw to Jessica. If there's one thing that you could change, I know the number we always hear is 4% of media coverage. I think it's 2% of sponsorship dollars are devoted to women's sports, which personally at Sports Innovation Lab, we're obviously working to get those numbers changed, and the Fan Project was something that was just a beginning for us. But if there's something, maybe not anything specific, but if there's anything you could change right now in the industry, which I'm sure there's many, but, and I think I was getting Amira's answer towards the end of that too, but what's one or two things that jumps out at you that you can say, hey, like, this isn't an astronomical idea. This is something that could easily be done, and we just have to start, doing it, really.
Yeah, I think that the media could just cover women's sports better and more often. And I've been saying that for years. It's like, that sounds so simple on its face, like just cover them more. Obviously, that's a huge challenge for sports media. Part of that is like changing the diversity of sports media, which is incredibly white and incredibly male, more so than almost any other form of journalism that exists. But yeah, it is kind of a chicken and an egg. There is like, do you need more media first? And then once people are watching, then they get more resources, or do you give more resources, better product, then the media follows? But I work in media, so I tend to, that's where I slant. And I do think that if I could change anything immediately, it would be that you could just get good comprehensive coverage of women's sports in all the major places that you look for that kind of information. I think we've seen it with everything around the NWSL in the last week, around abuse allegations that have come out, that you're seeing places that have never covered this league in any real way take up these huge headlines around this league at this moment of crisis, which is news and should be covered. But at the same time, it's like, where have you been like for 9 years? Like, these women have been out here, these people have been out here doing this work this entire time. And that's always incredibly frustrating. And you can do it. And I always cite this when I talk about this, but in the last year or two, the New York Times has decided that they're going to cover the WNBA. And they just have. And it's great coverage. And they have this diverse group of people doing it. And it's wonderful. And I think that's probably, there's a particular female editor at the New York Times Sports that I think is probably the push behind that. And that matters to just people. I always talk about how, like, I don't watch the NBA, but I always know what's happening because it's like osmosis. Like, if you just exist in the sports world in any kind of way, you're like, well, I have a sense of like what's going, like, I don't watch football anymore. I know what's going on in the NFL right now. And I just want that for women's sports. Like, I want to feel that osmosis, so that it's not all the work that it takes just to follow like games. It just can be so exhausting. And like we were talking about, women's sports fans will do that work, right? Like, this is like, we're almost like enabling in some way, because like they'll go out of their way to figure out how to manage this. But the media infrastructure could just do so much better, sports media in general. And I just really believe that women's sports are great and fun, and that as soon as you begin covering it, you get sucked in and you feel that. And I just want media to take that on, because I do think once that starts happening, people will start watching. They'll become those loyal fans that we talked about. We'll get more resources into women's sports, and we'll just rock rolling down the hill at that point.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. We've spoke with Kia Clark, who's the CEO of the New York Liberty,
That's
on
my girl.
yep, on the Fluid Fan podcast. And she mentioned that the New York Times did a piece on the Liberty, and Sabrina Ionescu, who is the wonderful athlete that she is, and has the polarizing kind of following there. But we're recording this in the midst of the WNBA semifinals. There's a lot of traction behind the unfortunate potential last game of Sue Bird, and there was the great moment with her and Diana Taurasi, and everyone's chanting one more year, and the passion is unmatched. It's just not getting the visibility that it most definitely deserves. So, Amira, anything to add to that in terms of potential changes we could see? I know you were hinting
I mean,
at it.
there's of course a long list, but I think Jess, she really covers it all from the media landscape, and I'll just take the other side of it, which is probably going to lead into your next question. But I think that so much of what we hear sometimes is like, I don't know where to go, right? Like, I don't know how to access not just information about these games, but like a different type of analysis, right? That
Yes.
the
Yes.
way that we even have been kind of taught to think about sports is a model that we've seen replicated. It's embrace debate. It's in, and like, listen, I love debate. Like, I'll debate with the best of them, right? But I think that part of what we also try to offer, and what many people are out here doing the work to really try to invest in, is say, like, what are the other ways that we can talk about sports? What are the other ways people can consume them? So the media is certainly one part of the conversation, but like, there's organic sporting communities that have cropped up, that have modeled, right, and created these other ways of talking about sports or covering sports or interacting at games, right? And I think that that's like, both me and Jessica live in Austin, and go to Austin FC games, for instance. And the soccer community here in Austin, and the way they've been very intentional in the supporting communities, and from the music to the tifos that they do at the beginning of the game, right? Like,
Yep.
it is a different space than my kids have ever experienced in sports, right? And
Mhm.
so thinking also from the ground up. So you have the coverage and the media aspect, but also thinking locally, and thinking about how so much of what we get when we watch on TV at the collegiate or professional elite levels really starts and gets transmitted at the youth level. And so I think that there's a lot of local inspiration out there, and also a lot of ability to change, and feel like you're doing something at the local level too, in kind of creating the sporting spaces you want to see there.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I know our fan project research had a statistic that the pipeline of girls youth sports is growing 6 times greater than the boys. So obviously there is a massive capacity to get these young girls the ability to play, and that starts in the community level. Jess, looks like
Well,
you got
there's just
something
so
you want to
much
get in there. Yeah,
room for growth
of
around that. And
course.
I would just, this is my like personal bugaboo, but like I study or I write about girls in baseball. And I was just interviewing someone for a piece that does this in Baseball for All, Justine Siegel. And basically we were talking about how if you just create the space for girls to show up in sports, they will. They're like waiting for someone to provide them that opportunity, right? So it makes a lot of sense to me that that's where there's rapid growth, because there's so we have not done enough to
Right.
this point, right? So like if you build that infrastructure, the girls are ready, and they'll show up in
Yep.
those places.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
people will come right out to watch them here at the middle school that our kids go to. The girls volleyball team is, I would say, the most popular sport at this school, and you can see that that is a trickle down effect from the fact that UT has the number one collegiate volleyball team for women in the country, and their games are packed. And I think that that culture creates a culture where, for if you're a middle schooler here, you're like, are you going to the girls volleyball game on Thursday? Like, that
yep.
is a huge thing.
Yeah, if you can see it, you can be it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. So as we begin to wrap up here, I'm going to throw to both of you, but I'm curious to know, there's obviously you guys have goals moving forward for the platform. You've obviously accomplished a lot so far in the years that you've had making the switch and getting onto Blue Wire and hosting all the different fireside chats and the different audio talks. But I'd love to know, what's next? Do you have maybe a short-term plan, a long-term 5-year plan, and how has the grant money that we provided through our work here at the Fan Project, how's that going to help get those goals over the finish line? I don't know if
Yeah,
either one of you want to jump in first.
for sure. I'll certainly do that. Yeah, the grant from the fan project has been so appreciative, and it is so appreciated, and it is so helpful. Like any support we receive in doing the work that we do and thinking about what's next. And I think for Burn It All Down as a space, there's a lot, like just said, there's a lot of growth, a lot of room for growth. I think some very exciting things that we have is that we've also started to dip our toe and go more into various types of audio. So we have a number of different collaborations in the works um, that we're involved in various ways with long form narrativized storytelling. And I think that a lot of us now are in a position because of the support we've received from the fan project, from our Patreon, from Blue Wire, to think right about um, different types of audio storytelling. Brenda did an amazing episode back in June about horses and doping and sex and it was amazing. Okay,
It
I
was
don't even
amazing.
like
It was like
horses.
28 minutes
It
of
was
like
28
amazing.
minutes of amazing narrative storytelling about a subject that I would not have willingly listened to,
Yep.
but was so good, right? And the more that we get to explore that, it means that we can still do like we already, every Tuesday we have a discussion and a segment in the podcast that everybody has come to know and love. Thursdays we drop our interviews, but it opens up possibilities for us to do on the ground reporting, to do more of the special episodes that I did, for instance, last year when I talked to 12 different Black women from age 13 to on up from the Olympic, youth, collegiate level, to put all their voices together to talk about what last summer looked like for them, right? What that meant for them. And
Yeah.
the way that we get to be creative and play with how we tell these stories is what we're continuing to explore. And now we have the tools, right? And the equipment to be able to start exploring that. I think the other way that we're seeing and we're committed to growing is about visibility. And this is huge because everything we've been saying, right? If you can be it, you can see it. But also, even if it's not for you to be, you know that it's possible, right? It changes your entire kind of frame about what you even think is possible in the world, right?
Mhm.
And there's so many people who learn of our podcast and say, I've been waiting for this, or
Hmm.
this sounds like what I want to listen to. So things that kind of seem like, oh, merch and decals, but they matter. The fact that we have flamethrower decals, right? That people can rock on their water bottle, on their computer to like signify they're part of that community is something that's really significant to us. This summer, we made a shirt with all of the Black members' names of the U.S. Women's National Team Summer Squad. And when I tell you that was like flying off the shelves, and it's important for us, our merch proceeds, like with that, for instance, also in part went to Black Women's Players Collective, right? Because I think we also believe in community, in reaching out horizontally, right?
Definitely.
And
Yeah.
lifting each other. So a portion of our merchandise always goes to organizations doing the work that we're highlighting, whether it is something like Sports for Life from the Women's Sports Foundation, which prioritizes athletic opportunities for Black, Latinx, and Indigenous girls between the ages of 11 to 16. In May, a lot of it was going to the Asian American Sports Task Force, a journalism organization. And so always our friends over at Athlete Ally. And I think that is the kind of model that we would like to see. And so stuff that allows us to invest in things like merch, in opportunities to do interviews, in just time, right? We took our first break last year and it was the most emotional thing because we up until point had done 3 straight years with no weeks off
Wow.
ever.
Wow.
And we have been able, with this support, right, to work smarter and more efficiently, to take care of our own mental health,
Yep.
to have times where we say, hey, we're going to step away for a month and come back with mega stuff, right? And put things in works and have a community that trusts us to do that. And so that is where we're at and where we're going. And the support from like the fan project, like I said, and from our continued support from our flamethrowers allows us to also feel like it's super possible to just keep growing and expanding. And honestly, we always kind of feel like sky's the limit because we have so much room to grow. But little things like every one person, Jessica says this all the time, is there one person in your life today that you can share our podcast with? That really helps, right?
Yep.
Retweets, like the same with any digital content thing, retweets, tags, right? These are huge help when you're building content in digital spaces. And I think that that's kind of what we're continuing to work on. And just the more support we have, the more we can bring more diverse voices in, the more we can tell stories in new creative ways, the more we can get on the ground. I mean, right now we're trying to go to New Zealand for the Women's World Cup. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We have dreams, of course, but I think it's like not just because obviously, duh, who doesn't want to go to New Zealand, but because I think that when we have the opportunity to get in front of people and to ask questions, our questions are different. What we do with those answers are different. And we want to keep bringing that to the flamethrowers and to everybody else who needs burn it all down in their lives.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. There's obviously this past year and a half has really made everyone focus on the work-life balance and, working from home, and there's no easy way to find a stop point and everything. And, with Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles with the mental health aspect, that's really starting to become to the forefront. So it's great to hear that you guys are putting an emphasis on that as well. And Jessica, before I go to you with your thoughts on where you guys can head, and obviously Amira set the stage pretty well. Where can everyone find you? Where obviously Blue Wire's the platform, but do you have social handles that everyone can get to on Instagram, Twitter, wherever? Where can we find the Burn It Down podcast?
Yeah, you can find Burn It All Down on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. burnitalldownpod.com is our website, and that's where you can find links to all those other socials. You can find all the episodes, all the transcripts. We have a transcript for every single episode for people who are like me and they'd rather read a lot of stuff. Or if you're searching for a specific topic that you are interested to see if we've covered, yes is the answer. We most likely have, and you can find that on burnitalldownpod.com. So I suggest people start there.
Excellent. Well, Burn It All Down is obviously headed for great things. Where are you seeing the show and the platform go in the next year or so, Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, Amira said it all beautifully. The one thing I was thinking as she was talking is that we're talking about women's sports and content in the specific way. Like, that's a place that we try really hard to hit, is when there are big, massive events around women's sports. Like, we try really hard to cover those things. So in the next year, we're going to have the Winter Olympics. And the Paralympics. So this past summer, we did a ton of stuff around the Olympics, but also we had a full week dedicated to the Paralympics, even week and a half. We had, I don't know, Amira, what do we have, like 6 episodes or something that we released?
Yeah, featuring voices from Paralympians, from producers, just the full gamut.
Yeah, so we'll do that again with the Winter Olympics coming up. As Amira said, of course, the Women's World Cup. But, even we were just talking about doing a fireside chat not fireside chat. We're doing a watch party for the WNBA finals. Like, we so often tie ourselves to these major women's sports events because our fans love them as much as we do. And we think we're really good at covering them. And so whenever we're looking forward, those are the types of things that we are really putting a lot of our attention into. And hopefully, like, the more support we have, like, as Amira said, we're always trying to think of like new and innovative ways that we can cover these things. And we would love to just be thinking more expansively about how we can do the work that we do around these big women's sports events, and new ways to bring new listeners in, but also, keep the flame throwers happy with what we're giving them. So I think that's where we're really pointed.
And the last thing I forgot too, that you just reminded me of, 2 years into the show was the first time all 5 of us got together in a room, and we did a live show at Columbia University in New York. And I'm gonna cry again. Oh my gosh, what is today?
We're almost done. You can hold it together for just a bit longer.
It was like 2 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, so we're like, nobody's gonna come here, and the room was packed when we started. And when we said, like, when Brenda did the introduction, the room exploded. And it was the first time, like, we always are talking to ourselves, right? Yep. It was the first time we like really could feel that community. And since then, we've been able to do live shows in Nashville, thanks to the Men Conference and Vanderbilt Sports and Society program. Pandemic definitely was not letting us be great and disrupted some of our other things we had in the works. But I say that to say the other thing that we love to do, if and when the world opens back up, like we had a whole West Coast slate of things that were canceled. But the ability to get the 5 of us together and do live shows where we get to actually film, record in front of people, do real feedback, and then talk to our flamethrowers and do meetups in person. A Biad tour is literally my dream. Give me a tour bus, please, somebody. I'll just take my co-host to escape rooms across the country. They'll love it.
Oh my gosh.
But
I'm not sure the grant's going to fully get you a bus, but we might help you get a little bit.
Every piece helps. Every piece.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you again to both of you, Jessica Luther, Dr. Amira Rose Davis from the Burn It All Down podcast. Appreciate the work that you two are doing, as well as your 3 other co-hosts. We will be looking out for that watch party. Fluid fans love to co-watch. It's a major Fluid fan behavior. So we'll be putting that out on our channels as well. So looking forward to that. Personally, as a University of Missouri alum, I'm rooting for the Mercury. So I have my Sophie Cunningham jersey waiting in the rafters.
Right.
Yeah, big fan of hers. All-time leading scorer at Mizzou. So she's a superstar. But thank you both for joining me today. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to that co-watching event like we discussed right there. And then anything else coming down the pipeline with potential, Beijing week and, anything from New Zealand and further on. So looking forward to all the great stuff coming out of your platforms. Appreciate it.
Jack, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you both. Thank you once again to Jessica Luther and Dr. Amira Rose Davis of the Burn It All Down podcast for sharing their insights on the sports media landscape with me today. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. As you heard, their passion for women's sports and the women working within sports was evident throughout the entire discussion. And alongside their 3 co-hosts, Jessica and Amira are truly creating a community through their podcasts, their content streams, and their various platforms. You can really tell that it's a loyal and influential group, and they're making a big splash on the market. So we're excited to be partnering with them throughout the grant, and we look forward to seeing what their platform has in store next. So I want to thank you, the listener and the viewer today, for joining us, and be sure to tune in next Thursday when I sit down with Rakay Gibson and Angela Spears, the hosts of Black Girls Talk Sports. We'll see you next week.